Good morning, and thank you for being here. We have a number of guests with us, and we're glad that you're here. We're happy to have our daughter here, Tracy, and two of our grandchildren, Roger and Daphne. They'll be with us for a little while. We're not here to worship the flag this morning, but that flag will help us to remember how God has blessed America. We have several that have served in the military in this congregation, and one in particular that not only served, but he was also wounded in combat in Vietnam. That's Sam Cofield. And if you would, let's have that on the screens up here. Pay attention to the monitor.
I want to thank our veterans on this Independence Day. Thank you for a job well done. Thank you for the battles that's been won. Thank you for the battles you fought. Thank you for freedom you have bought. Thank you for the times you've served. Thank you for the freedom earned. Thank your families for sharing you. They knowing that they miss you and they do love you. I'm sorry for the lives that was lost. Freedom is not cheap. It comes with a very high cost. I love my freedom. I love my red, white, and blue. Thank you, veterans, for all that you have done. Thank you.
I think a very appropriate scripture this morning is in Psalms chapter 33 and verse 12. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. God has blessed our nation in many, many different ways. We have wild woods all across the country, providing us with lumber to build houses and buildings, natural resources in abundance, the rich, fertile soil for growing crops for our ever-increasing population. We've got valuable minerals, everything from gypsum to iron for supporting our industrial system here. We have rivers running in every state, all sizes, carrying water and people and products everywhere. We've got oil, natural gas, we've got coal, and all the fuels that the future brings, and uranium and the geothermal. I especially appreciate the scenery, and I'm sure you do too. When I was talking to Frank Lyons just a few days ago, the day before we had the service for Gene, I asked him, I said, what do you remember the most in your relationship? What are your fond memories? And he said, that's a hard one, but I think it's probably our travels together. They were able to travel abroad, but he said, what I enjoyed and she enjoyed the most was traveling in our country. And I have to agree with that. Deborah and I have been fortunate to see a lot of countries, but it's always the most enjoyable for that plane to touch the tarmac in New York City or Atlanta, Georgia, or Houston, Texas, and say we're home. There's nothing like home. Our great founding fathers, we need to give thanks to them. Are you aware that 52 of the 55 framers of our Constitution were God-fearing, Bible-carrying, church-going statesmen? Let me read for a couple of them. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Signed, Thomas Jefferson. One more. I always consider by settlement of America to view it with reverence and with wonder as the opening of a grand scene and a divine providence for the illumination of the ignorant and the emancipation of the slavish part of mankind. Signed, John Adams. It was Winston Churchill who said, "Those who do not remember history are condemned to repeat it." There are those who are trying to erase our history. Speaking of resources, we have some of the greatest deposits of stone in this country. I'm talking about granite and marble for making monuments and statues, and yet there are people that are tearing them down. When a president becomes president, he has to take an oath of office. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And he closes that grand declaration by saying, "So help me God." And I don't know that we really enunciate that right. I think we should say, "So help me God." He needs the help of God. So I know that God has blessed America already. The question is, what have we done? I submit this morning that that same oath of office applies to us, that we too should be responsible for supporting America and defending America. On one occasion, in Matthew chapter 22, the Herodians and the Pharisees came to Jesus to try to entangle him in his own words. See, the Herodians were loyal to Herod and also to the Roman Caesar. They wanted to find any way to stop his speech. So they said, "Jesus, we know that you are a man of truth, so tell us, is it lawful for a man to pay tribute to Caesar?" Jesus said, "Show me your tax money." And they brought a denarius, one day's wages. He looks at it, he says, "Whose image is on that coin?" "Caesar." Jesus says, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, unto God the things that are God's." Do you know which Caesar was on that coin? It was Tiberius Caesar. He was not a good man. He was Caesar during the ministry of Jesus and also the crucifixion of Jesus. They said he was depraved morally. He was a sexual predator. Even his own people despised him. And politically, he was insecure. They said he was paranoid. He thought everybody was out to get him, to take his throne. And so he had them murdered. He murdered and murdered and murdered. And yet Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, unto God the things that are God." Are you aware that we are to pray for people like that? Let me read a little bit from Romans chapter 13. Let every soul, that's all of us, be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. That's pretty strong, isn't it? You actually condemn yourself if you fail to support and honor the governing authorities. 1 Timothy chapter 2, the very early verses of that chapter, Paul says to Timothy, I exhort. Now that means I'm not teaching anymore, I'm preaching. I exhort thee that first, supplication, prayer, intercession, giving of thanks, be made for all men. And then, lest you not know who he's talking about specifically, he says, kings, for all those in authority, that you may live a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. That word honesty should be translated reverence. Therefore, it has to do with our worship. I want to be able to worship in peace, don't you? So to do that, he says, pray. It doesn't matter if it's Nero, it doesn't matter if it's Tiberius or Caligula or a dictator today, a king. Well, I don't like the president. It has nothing to do with you and what you like. It's an exhortation. You're to pray for them. He goes on to say in that 13th chapter, a little bit further down, he says, for because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render, therefore, to all their due. Taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor. I love this one. Honor to whom honor is due. We need to honor our police force. I'm tired of hearing about people that disparage our police force. So there's one bad apple somewhere. What about the other 99% that are committed to protect and serve? He says, honor to whom honor is due. So if we want to bless America, we need to support America. And we need to defend America. There's a rather obscure passage in Psalms chapter 82. Rescue the weak and the helpless, and deliver them from the hands of the wicked. How appropriate to describe how we are to defend our country. Now, I don't have time to talk to you about all the atrocities that were committed by Adolf Hitler in World War II, or Hirohito in the war with Japan, Yamamoto, who bombed Pearl Harbor. I don't have time to talk about all those atrocities. Or Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, or Kim Sung in North Korea. Millions and millions of people were murdered. I didn't say killed. They were not casualties of war. I'm talking about murder. So this passage becomes so meaningful that we rescue those that are weak and helpless and deliver them from the hands of the wicked. We need to support and defend our country to do that. Well, wait a minute, preacher. Now, the Lord said turn the other cheek. Now, if you haven't seen the sermon I did, I think 3 weeks ago, I talked about that very thing. The Bible is in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, Sermon on the Mount, does not talk about warfare. It's talking about a slight, something that happens to you personally. Somebody popping you on the side of the face just to get a response. It's not what he's talking about here. King David was a warrior. We hear about him fighting Goliath, the Philistine. But beyond that, he was a great warrior. Remember the minstrel women, the singers, were dancing and singing around Saul. Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s. That infuriated Saul. He wanted to kill David. David had killed his tens of thousands. He was a warrior. But what did God call David? Man after my own heart. Man after my own heart. In Romans chapter 12, listen to this. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Notice how that begins. If it is possible. Sometimes it's not possible. There's evil in the world. Sometimes it's not possible to live peaceably with all men. And thus we have the responsibility to protect the weak and the helpless. God had to get involved quite often in the Old Testament. On one occasion, he was talking to Abraham. This was in Genesis 15, if you want to look. He said, Abraham, I'm going to bless you and your family and your children. But the time to punish the Amorites, the iniquity is not yet full. He said it would be 400 years. Why did the Amorites need to be punished? Because of their sin. It was deplorable. It was awful. They were completely corrupted, unredeemable. But he said, I'm going to let their iniquity become full. 400 years. So when Joshua came back out of Egypt, went to Jericho, God said, destroy them all. Men, women, young, old, children, sheep, goats, oxen, cattle, destroy it all. You say, well, I don't understand that. Well, I'm not perfect at understanding that either. Sometimes it's understanding that God's ways are different. His thoughts are different from ours, Isaiah 55. But I've got an idea. They had so corrupted themselves that God knew that those children would grow up to be just like them, the most humane, the most divine, the most loving thing that God could do was take those children in their innocence to heaven before they were corrupted. But why kill all these animals? Because God did not want his people eating those animals and certainly not sacrificing those animals to God. See, God's nature and his essence is mentioned 61 times in the Bible. In just about every one of those instances, it says he can have literally no association with evil, with sin. One is in 1 John 1 and verse 6, where it says, God is light, in him is no darkness at all. And there's a big difference, we mentioned this 3 weeks ago, between killing and murder. In Exodus chapter 12, when it talks about the 10 Commandments, It is properly translated, thou shalt do no murder. But God saw the need for killing the days of Noah, the city of Sodom, and all of those different conflicts that took place with his people. There's a lot going on today that we don't like. I've had people ask me, do you think this is the end times? Is the world coming to an end? As if I would know. I'm not that smart. I don't know of anybody that is. They can take Revelation, Daniel, Ezekiel, and they can study and study and study it, but it's still just a theory. But I know this, God is not happy with America right now. When you've got prayer being dismissed in the schools, abortion, killing of babies being accepted as normal. The new word is transgender. You heard that word? They're trying to make male and female indistinguishable. Can't even tell the difference. If you decide in your heart that you're a man, you're a man. If you decide you're a woman, you're a woman. God's got to be shaking his head like, what has happened to my people? And we need to remember what's said in Galatians 6, verses 7 and 8. And that is that we reap what we sow. Be not deceived. Some people are being deceived. If you reap to the flesh, you reap corruption. You reap to the spirit, you reap everlasting life. Hosea in Hosea chapter 8 and verse 7 said his people were reaping the whirlwind. You sow to the flesh, you're going to reap more than you counted for. And that's what's happening in America. What can we do? God has blessed America. He continues to bless America. But what do? We can live a godly life. We can support our country. We can defend our country. But mostly, we can pray for those in leadership that we might live a quiet and peaceable life. This morning, we're going to extend the invitation. I hope you're a part of a redeeming cause here, thus giving us a redeeming solution. If you've not obeyed the gospel, we would encourage you to follow the Great Commission. Go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature, and he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. If you need to come back to Christ because you've been unfaithful, we want to help you in any way we can.